Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I'm Representative Natalie Zeliznakar. Thank you for coming out on a Sunday afternoon. Grant and I, Senator Grant Hauschild is here too. And we're happy to present to you as your elected officials. I'm at the House, he's at the Senate. And so I was excited when Grant said, yes, let's do this. So this is what we're doing to get the information to you. And then, so what we're going to do is, what we did in Proctor today was basically go through some healthcare issues, healthcare and education. And then I think we did that in about a half an hour. And then we had an hour for questions on any topic. You could just ask questions and I'll answer it, Grant will answer it. And so the superintendent, I can't see him, but he's so graciously, the lights are bright. So graciously stated he will run a mic when we get to questions out to the audience so you can ask it and everybody can hear it. And then we will proceed.
Do you want me to go?
Sure.
Okay. Well, hey everybody, Grant Hauschild. Oh, this is much better. I found a shadow. Thank you all so much for being here. You know, I think it's really important that Natalie and I are coming together to really hear from citizens and from our voters. And regardless of party, regardless of our background, being able to do this so that folks can come to one spot, I think is really, really important. And I don't think every district does that. And so I think it's really great that we have this opportunity. For those of you that I haven't met, and I know I've met many of you, I got involved in politics when I was really young. And you know, it's my theory, and I promise I have a point to this. I got involved because in Minnesota, we go out of our way to help each other. Our friends, family, neighbors, but also complete strangers. And it's my theory that we do that not because it makes us feel good inside. We do it because we know that life is that much easier when we have each other's back. And I think that is a Minnesota value. And I think all of us in this room have those Minnesota values. And I say that because this is a moment for us to talk about really, really important issues. And I can guarantee you that a lot of us disagree vehemently with one another on a lot of issues. I know that Natalie and I disagree with each other on a lot of issues. So I would just ask that we come at this from a place of Minnesota values, that we have respect for one another, that when we're asking questions, we will do our absolute best to answer honestly. And you may have some back and forth with one another, but we just ask that you do that respectfully as well. This town hall is about education and it's about healthcare, but we're happy to answer questions about other issues as well, like Natalie suggested. On education, this is something that's really, really important to me. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. My wife and I chose Minnesota as where we wanted to raise our family because of education. And I say that honestly. Minnesota is known for our public education system. We're known for the Minnesota Miracle back in the 1970s when Minnesota made a decision to fully fund education and create a system that had some of the best results in the country. Unfortunately, it's my perspective that we have really fallen behind on that promise. And so a couple of the things that I'm fighting for are an increase to the per pupil funding formula. This would be a 5% increase this biennium and a 5% increase next biennium. And that would help us get back on parity from those days when we had some of the best education in the country. But it's not just per pupil funding that we need. We also have a special education gap that we're facing. Right now in Minnesota, and Jay, our superintendent, could probably talk to this personally, we have a circumstance where special education needs are increasing. And when we don't have a cross subsidy that helps fill in that gap, superintendents, school administrators, and teachers themselves have to take from the general education budget. So all that does is those enormous costs get spread out across all of our students. And what we need to do is fully fund that cross subsidy so that especially in our more rural and greater Minnesota schools, we are funding that gap so that the general dollars go where they actually need to go. I will say I serve on the policy committee for education. And I may be a Democrat, but I am not in favor of strict mandates on education from the top down. What I do favor is goals that we place on our superintendents and school boards to try to attain some broad goals. But there have been Republican proposals and Democratic proposals that would specifically push certain curriculum. And I'm not somebody that favors that because I'm not an education expert. I shouldn't be dictating what those experts know on the ground is the best thing for their local communities. But I do support education and incentives to make sure that they get there. The last thing I'll say before I pass to Natalie is I introduced a bill on that exact point, which is an increase, actually a doubling of funding for our CTC, our career and technical education. And that's things like shop classes, culinary arts, healthcare, getting those opportunities to our young people, because we know that students need to have those catalysts of opportunity in order to inspire them to be better at education. I know myself, I wasn't a great high school student, but I eventually found my passion for public service, and that inspired me to be a heck of a lot better college student and higher ed student once I figured out that passion. So let's provide those opportunities, let's incentivize and provide the funding to our schools to do that and do what they know best. Natalie, I'll pass it to you on education.
Here I go, right? So I came into this without a political background. I grew up in St. Francis, Minnesota on a farm, and my dad was a principal and then later a public school superintendent long after I left, and my mom was a bus driver. So I was around education my entire life. I was blessed with some phenomenal teachers. And so when I look at this Minnesota miracle, I think what has changed from when all of us in this room went to school with how we're doing education today. And I am of the belief that I'd like a little bit more of what went on when I was in school to be the Minnesota of today. And when I say that, I say that in respect to 30% of our kids at certain grade levels in Minnesota can't read. 50% of all kids are not reading in Minnesota public schools at grade level. That, to me, is not a Minnesota miracle. And that is not just unique to COVID. It dropped significantly more after COVID. But when you look at those statistics, that is something that is extremely concerning to me. You know, I grew up where we did the Pledge of Allegiance every day. Does anybody remember that? Did you do that? Mm-hmm. We did it every day. I've supported a bill that we do the Pledge of Allegiance every day. It rotated through the kids. We are Americans first and foremost, and it shouldn't even be, that should be a bipartisan thing. Right now, as the law is written, that the school can choose how often they do it. If they, you know, I believe it should be part of what we're doing in Minnesota education. Pledge of Allegiance. My other big concern is just funding things. Obviously, we fund public education. Education is the root to opportunity. And when you look at it, I have employed many people over the last 20 years. I built a business. I worked, I'm a nursing home administrator. I worked right across the street at Sunrise. Took my first job in 1997, something like that. Ran it for 4.5 years, built the assisted living. We did some innovative things. And, you know, the opportunities that you have in bringing health occupation classes to the school, I had that at 16. Those programs aren't existing everywhere. 2 weeks ago, I went to Shakopee Public Schools to see what they're doing with health occupations in the trades in schools, to see what we need to do to replicate some of that for 2 harbors. Proctor does some amazing things with the trades. I went to LP, I went out to logging, and I watched their whole production there. It's amazing. The trade programs have to be an equal curriculum path as a 4-year degree. And I had a child, 2 kids, and one went both ways, as far as 4-year degree and a Dunwoody track. And the trades need employees, huge right now. And that is a career path. Entrepreneurship is in the trade programs. And having that available to our kids, I think, is what we need to be able to have. And so when we look at school funding, what I'm asking is, what are we funding? What classes are we funding? Are Minnesota kids that go to any school, regardless of zip code, regardless of the funding level, going to know how to read? Are they going to be able to balance their checkbook? Are they going to understand what a compounding interest rate is? Are they going to understand, you know, cause and effect on the basic things, how to fill out a job application? If you can't read, you're really at a disadvantage. Regardless of where you came from, what your ethnic background is, your gender, all of those things are irrelevant. What matters is, can you read? Because you can't follow the job commands at your work if you can't read. Can't read a care plan at the nursing home and make sure you toilet somebody every 2 hours or check on them if you can't read. So if we have this huge gap, we have to really look at what are we going to do to close the gap? Because we spent 2 years with lockdowns and kids were doing remote learning, and every teacher in every classroom will say the kids are behind. And so if we don't fix the reading reset, and I'm a big fan of the science of reading. CBS just did a big press release on that 2 weeks ago on the science of reading, and that we all grew up learning phonics, letters. They dismantled that reading initiative program, and right now, the reading scores don't match. So when I look at what Mississippi did in 2013, they were like 48 in the US on reading. They switched to the science of reading, and they're #1 right now. So they increased it in 6 years. They've turned their reading proficiency around. And so the opportunity for kids happen when you can read. And so I think we need to get back to the basics and make sure that our fundamental reset in education includes not only the funding piece, but what is the curriculum? And what is that going to look like in public schools? That we have the basics are being taught for sure, and it is prioritized.
Do you want to touch on health and then come back to me?
Sure. Well, healthcare has been my lane for the last 40 years. I started as a CNA, high school. I'm a nursing home administrator still, and then I built assisted living. I was a minority owner, and the majority owners chose to sell in 2013, and I stayed on for 10 years. I left the field in 2019, so I don't own anything, and I've been involved with healthcare my entire life. But right now, we're in a world of hurt in nursing homes and assisted livings. And so there's been many nursing homes that have called me. I've had forums in 2 harbors. I've had them in Hermantown. In the last 2 months that I've been in office, I've met with many providers, disability group homes, family members who are providing care for their children in their homes, nursing homes, assisted livings, and the list goes on. The reality is if you don't have caregivers, you can't give care. So there's a piece of it that's the funding mechanism. That program is highly funded by medical assistants. Nursing homes and assisted living, probably 80% of the people we serve are on medical assistance. And how is medical assistance funded? All of us in the room. So we have the greatest need right now with the largest number of baby boomers aging, and we are at the worst place for staffing. People don't want to work in education, they don't want to work as police officers, and they don't want to work in healthcare right now. Everybody's burnt out. And that's the cornerstone pillars for our societies and our communities. And so what are we going to do to change it is the questions that when I'm at the committees asking, what can we do? We're highly mandated in healthcare. So on the assisted living example, we fined the assisted livings in the state of Minnesota $3 million during the COVID years. $3 million, let that sink in. We have 1,700 assisted livings. Many of them are not making it, they're on a credit line. So when the bank calls the note, they could fail. We have 300 nursing homes, they're on credit lines. If the bank calls the note, they could fail. Ely's on the list, there's a whole bunch of them, and they all reach out to me in tears. What are we going to do if this leaves our community? Is everybody in this room ready to care for somebody 24 hours a day, 365 days a year in their home? I mean, we are in a world of hurt if we don't fix how we staff nursing homes and how we make it where people want to be in them or assisted livings. And so we set the parameters during COVID, and when you're in a pandemic, what I said to the state, I met with the Department of Human Services and Minnesota Department of Health last week, and I said, when you're in a pandemic, what would possess you to fine the facilities $3 million for just assisted livings? Why would you come in and survey when you have a receptionist trying to keep their head above water and the paperwork's not there, or somebody else's record is incomplete, or something else is, and so you find them $3,000, $5,000, $10,000. I have facilities that have had $100,000 of fines. Now they're trying to figure out, how am I going to pay for it when the food truck comes? Why would you fine them when we knew we didn't have staff? When you set the parameters that the staff had to be out 14 days if you were exposed to COVID or COVID positive, then it moved to 10 days, then it moved to 7 days, then it moved to 5 days. Every time we had somebody go home, in some of these facilities we had 2 rows of people home at the same time. There was no second, third, fourth line like hockey to come in. So the people that were at work had no choice but to work 16-hour days. So every week I get a reference ask, will you be a reference? I'm leaving healthcare. Not going to do it. They're going into construction, they're doing anything else but healthcare because they're tired of being mandated, they're tired of having to work, because if you show up for your shift, you're there, you're penalized if you can't leave. So now if you have little kids, you have kids to get to dance, kids to get to hockey, you got to make a choice. Are you going to resign from it? because you did your deal, you showed up for work, but now you can't leave. And then it's a child care issue, and the list goes on and on. So this dilemma, I said to them, we need to get a refund back to these facilities so they can stay afloat and figure this out. And then find another way to do plans of correction and give them time to improve and put the money back into the facility. Don't just put it in this general fund or program you have in Minnesota. We need to help the facilities get stabilized, increase the wages, and then add to the programming. So we're in a world of hurt right now, but we have to go around the tree a different way. We have to find a way to get healthcare workers re-engaged, health occupation classes back at high school, teach them the CNA course, give it for free in high school. We can't make all these barriers. The criminal background study check, I'm working on those committees. The things people are disqualified is a ridiculous list of bounced check. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so we're disqualifying some very good people from working in our profession. So I'm working on that, and I'm hoping that's going to be bipartisan too, to have the good people still be able to work in our facilities to care for people. Thanks.
Thanks, Natalie. I'll just say this. My wife and I work in healthcare. I work for a foundation in healthcare, and my wife is a frontline advanced practitioner. And we had our baby in March of the start of COVID. So I won't stay focused on COVID. I'm so thankful we're beyond that and we're moving forward. But I will say that was a challenging couple of years, and I'm just thankful to the healthcare workers that put their lives really frankly on the line, including you, Natalie. I know you were there, and there was a lot of frustrations with what happened. And I think it's exactly right that we have to figure out how to get back on parity for our health systems, for our nursing homes, and the rest. Natalie mentioned Ely. The Ely nursing home is on the brink of bankruptcy. They are literally doing grassroots fundraising in their community to try to keep that place alive, serving seniors that otherwise would have no other place to go. So I'm working on a bill, Senate File 780, you don't need to remember these numbers, but that's about a $2 billion fix for reimbursement rates for hospitals and for paying nursing homes, getting more funding to nursing homes and paying those workers more, because we know we're facing a crisis in keeping those workers in our facilities. In addition to that, I know that we have a lot of rural healthcare facilities, whether it's in Cook or here in Two Harbors, up in Grand Marais. I've toured many of them. I'm sponsoring and the chief author on a bill that would provide $25 million to those critical access hospitals and rural hospitals directly to help bridge that gap that Natalie is talking about. That's something that I've worked very, very closely on, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get that funding going. But I think Natalie's exactly right. The workforce issue is really where we're facing some of the strongest issues. And I think we talked in Proctor, we just had a town hall there as well, and it feels like these pillars in our community, whether it's education, our healthcare system, our public safety, all of those are facing some of the hardest workforce issues. And it's really up to us with the surplus we have and the investments that we want to make. We have to have the political willpower to invest in the core pillars in our communities if we want them to survive. Our rural communities, to me, are really supported by four core things: our hospital, a school, a post office, and I can't think of the fourth thing, but if we let those businesses, yeah, exactly, businesses. Thank you, Natalie. She's heard me probably say this before. If we let these things fall, if one of those falls, whether it's reimbursement rates for our hospitals, our nursing homes falling behind, our post offices not supported at the federal level, then our communities start to die. And that is the last thing I think that Natalie and I want, representing what is really one of the most rural districts in the entire state. And so I'm actively looking at how do we support our communities directly. And to that point, two of the other things that I'm working on are a bill that would provide local government aid and county program aid to our communities. And this is particularly important for rural Minnesota and greater Minnesota. The bill that I have proposed would provide $300 million in local government aid to our communities. We're talking over $1.5 million to a community like Two Harbors. And that goes to the city to decide where to disperse that money. They know best where it should go, but what it helps with is it helps reduce your property taxes. Because we know that infrastructure is going to happen. We know that this different funding for public safety is going to happen. So how do we make sure that they're getting the state resources that they need in order to reduce or sort of maintain your property taxes so they don't increase? The other one is something called a PILT formula, payment in lieu of taxes. This is a payment that the state makes on public lands. Why is that important? It's important because northern Minnesota, where we live, has some of the most public land in the entire state. And the state helps pay counties to oversee those lands, but also to make up for the lost tax dollars that they get because it's undevelopable. And those are pristine lands, those are places that we want to protect. So the state kind of pays the county to say, you protect these lands and here's money to help do it. I am changing that formula so that northern Minnesota gets millions more in funding from the formula compared to agriculture land in the southern part of the state. Back when the program was started, they were equal, forest land and ag land, and since then ag land has disproportionately increased in value because of agriculture, rightfully so, but it's my opinion that we need to get more of our fair share up here in northern Minnesota, which is why I'm changing the formula and have a bill before the tax committee. So I'm hopeful that you guys will see some direct appropriations to our communities. Lastly is bonding. I don't want to talk too much. Bonding is really important. We have a lot of different projects, about $55 million in northern Minnesota in our district that was in that bill, and I want it to be voted on. It was supported in the House bipartisanly. Unfortunately, in the Senate, it was stopped by the Senate minority, and it's my opinion we need to have a straight up or down vote on that bonding bill because we all agree we need to make investments in our communities so that it doesn't fall on property owners and your property taxes. So I'm hopeful we'll get that and both of us support that. So we'll see where it goes in the Senate, but I'm going to continue to fight for it.
And on the piece on the bonding, I know the House vote, I voted, like Grant said in the House, I voted for the projects for the North. The piece that it is getting tied up on, that I also agree with, that is really critical, and I'm not in the majority party, but the question is, we got a $20 billion surplus, and so the GOP senators are saying, look, we have $20 billion, let's use bonding with cash and not use the credit card in the state because we are not going to be with a flush surplus at all times. That's their position, that there needs to be more cash use than a charge, which I don't disagree with. And the other part is that they want to see Social Security taxes eliminated once and for all. And so that is the piece that's holding up that piece. Otherwise, I think that the Senate GOP would be on board with bonding, that they want to see a commitment, 100% commitment, that we are going to, for the state of Minnesota, finally eliminate Social Security tax in Minnesota, because we are an outlier in the 50 states, and we are getting bombarded by seniors, and I can see there's probably 2 in here that qualify as seniors, but they want to see it done. So, I just am flooded with it. I know that Senator Hauschild is too, so that's the holdup. That's the ask from the Senate side. But on the piece of healthcare, one of the things that made me run for office is I spent 2 years with my hands at frozen windows because it is cold. It's March right now. And I brought fish houses to my assisted living so that the families could be together when their mom was dying. I had a Catholic funeral in the parking lot because that couldn't happen any other way. And I thought, oh my God, hell, this clearly throws over. I can't believe this is happening. And so it wasn't something that went on like in the 1991 blizzard where it was 5 days. I could do anything for 5 days with a bare bone staff. This went on for 2.5 years with bare bone staff. So families and the mental health stuff is really, healthcare has suffered in a mental health way because we didn't see smiles for a long time, and we also didn't have enough staff and we didn't have families coming in. Nobody was coming in. We didn't have entertainers coming in. We didn't have family members coming in. We had families crying at the window. The hardest day of my life, which was worse than 8 breast cancer surgeries, I said, I cannot do this again. To watch a 70-year-old man crying at the window with his hands, it is forever in my head. And I am one healthcare worker, and that is one story. And for that person, there wasn't another minute. They weren't going to have another moment. It was that moment. When you're in tragedy and you're in trauma, there are bills at the House right now, and I'm coming that patients have the right to have somebody with them at all times at the hospital. That a resident has the right to have somebody with them when you're dying. That you can't deny the spouse or the child to come in and be with them. I was doing the rosary for people and looking it up on YouTube in those moments with people because I thought, my God, we took better care of the Angus cattle at my farm than I feel like I can do for these people. And it was heartbreaking. Heartbreaking, and it devastated, and that is still a complete scar for a lot of healthcare workers because we had the weight of the world. We always partnered with families. We always had volunteers. We always had the priests, the pastors, and everybody coming in for entertainment, and everything was gone. And we were left there by ourselves, and it was a long time. So it's not a surprise to me that healthcare workers are exhausted. They don't want to come back. Doctors don't want to be doctors. Nurses don't want to be nurses. Aides don't want to be aides. I mean, I get called every week, do you want to be a nursing home administrator, this state, this Minnesota? No, I don't. I did it 30 years. You know, I've been on call for 30 years. And my phone rang. I couldn't get my scrubs in the washing machine fast enough before I was going in for another shift. And that went on far too long. And so, you know, people had to wait. So when you hear people say, yeah, my mom had to wait to go to the restroom, or my mom had to wait and it was delayed, it's not a surprise to me that anybody had to wait. If you go to ER right now, you're waiting too. You might be in a hallway on an ER bed because there's no beds. They can't get them from the floor back to the assisted livings or the nursing homes because they can't take people when they don't have staff. We don't have staff to do the medical transportation, the non-medical transportation. We need that. We need to fund that so we can even get them discharged. Somebody to come pick them up. Families live all over the country. So it's a very complicated thing, and it has to be laser focused right now because we can't afford for this to be imploding at a time when we have the most people aging. For the next 15 years, we're going to have a very aged Minnesota population. And we cannot afford to not have caregivers. So that is my number one priority, and there's some great bills. I'm hoping we're going to get them resolved to figure out how to stabilize this field. So we're doing our best.
All right, I think you've heard enough from us, so we'll just leave. No. I think we can open it to questions now. If folks want to raise their hand, I know Jay, I think, is willing to pass a mic maybe. And then,
We'll share a mic.
Yeah. I mentioned that my wife and I just had kids, a son who's 3 and a daughter who's 1. And I know firsthand she's an advanced practitioner. We both work busy careers. And the toll, I knew that it would be hard having kids. I'm sure a lot of you have kids. It's very hard. I didn't realize the stress that would be placed on my wife. And as a working professional, and both of us caring for our kids, it was a real difficult circumstance, but we are privileged, my wife and I, and we did have some modest paid time off, and we were able to, do what we needed to do with FMLA and bridge that gap. But, back to sort of my beginning statement about looking out for each other and that Minnesota value, I don't want that just for me and my wife or for people that maybe have jobs or careers that give them that opportunity. Every Minnesota, in my mind, deserves that opportunity to be with their child during those critical development months. Because it's not just about the family well-being, it's also about the future of our communities and ensuring that young people in those development stages are supported when they need it most. We talk about workforce issues and the challenges that we're facing. I know so many people my age who are teachers, nurses, or any other profession that have frankly left the workforce because they don't have that sort of support program when they have kids. They have kids and they just figure, you know what, the childcare costs, the not having paid leave, all of these things, it's just, I'm gonna stay home and be with my kids. Now, that's wonderful, and I want people to have that opportunity. But for those that are choosing between food on their table and staying home with their kids or keeping 2 part-time jobs to be with their kid, that's something that we should be able to fix here in Minnesota, and that's a value that I have. Now, when it comes to the actual bill itself, it has been proposed, and it's in sort of a working document stage. I have had really, really good conversations with the Chamber of Commerce, with the National Federation of Independent Businesses, some more conservative-leaning organizations that I'm happy to work with. And so I am looking at that bill and what can we do to make it work for Minnesota. That might mean figuring out a way to exempt certain small businesses from that premium cost. When we talk about our tourism industry, When those workers are agreeing to a job that is maybe a strict 4-month period, perhaps we should have a way for those employers to know that those employees are there for at least those 4 months when they've hired them, because we know that those are the times that our tourism industry relies on that income. So there's some fixes. I'm also looking at small business grants to make sure that more of our businesses can afford some of the challenges that we'll be facing. But I strongly value this program, and I'm hopeful that we'll find a way to make it work.
Thank you for the question. I think everybody wants to have everything that we can possibly do for employees. I mean, I say that having employed many people in the last 30 years. With that said, what worries me with this bill is that we're coming off a pandemic. We have business owners, and I've been bombarded by phone calls and emails from across this whole area in the state. And what the concern is, they're like, this is a bill written with one employee. You're a small business owner. You have one employee. It's written to include seasonal, part-time, full-time. After 90 days, you can have 12 weeks off to take care of your mom or your dad. And in the same calendar year, you can have another 12 weeks off for any medical reason. And family is very broad. It could be, I just met you today, but you mean as much to me as my sister. So my concern, having ran 24-hour operations and now listening to the concerns from all the school districts, all the construction workers, all that, they're like, look, you have a person off, do the math. We're in a workforce shortage. How are we going to have this machine run and roll with what it needs to do when you do construction in a very limited amount of time? You think that we're not going to have an issue with filling positions. We can't just train somebody when that many people are off, because many of these positions takes months to get somebody to be able to be competent to fill that type of position. It absolutely does. You can't just grow a person in a petri dish to fill it. And so on the issue of caring for seniors, or who's going to teach, or all of this, it becomes a math equation of what are we going to do? Because we still have to care for seniors, we still have to educate kids, we still have to plow the roads, the list goes on and on. And so it's far beyond what the federal FMLA is, which allows for 12 weeks. And you're right, it allows for 12 weeks, full-time employees, and for companies that have more than 50. So at this point of where Minnesota is, when I looked at the Minnesota forecast, and it's, corporate taxes are already going down. We already haven't dealt with eliminating Social Security tax and figuring out how to do incentives to get businesses to come in, to increase another mandate on businesses, because this is creating a new department, like the unemployment taxes. It's going to create a new department in government where that tax the employer pays, and then they decide if they're going to split it with the employees. So then you're going to have an amount deducted from your check. And then the rates could go up for the businesses too, because we have no idea what the cost is going to be. And then what the cost is one piece, but how we're going to deal with staffing essential services is another piece. And I've had a lot of people say, people take out Aflac and they have benefits available that are already there. So that whole market would go away that exists. And then we have the fundamental piece of how we're going to fund it, and then a labor issue. So, and there's no language in this bill that talks about what about the benefits people have? Vacation, sick time that have been negotiated with unions or non-unions. Do they get 12 weeks plus another 12 weeks plus their sick time and vacation? How are we going to run the economic world of reality that we have to still do? So I've had 2 children. I've also had 8 surgeries with breast cancer. I've taken out a $300,000 credit line to fund the business through it all. And so I know what it's like to make these decisions. And yes, I use family and friends and the church and all of it, but sometimes government can't fill every void. And I would do everything I could for people. And we've done programs at our work where we gave our sick time to other people who were in need. We created cultures where we did all kinds of innovative things to help people. And I'd be the first that would do anything to help people. But this is going to be, sometimes there's unintended consequences, and this is one that could definitely lead to some unintended consequences. The goal is to help people, but we're going to transfer where we're hurting people. And that's the gap. And that's the piece where we have a math thing of numbers. So that's my concern. Yes. Yeah.
Lots of the concerns that you brought up are exactly some of the things that I'm talking to the chamber and other groups about. So I just want to be very clear. The bill is written a certain way, and we are working on some of those fixes for smaller businesses, for grants to communities, the definitions, a lot of those things, as well as the 24 weeks. You mentioned the 12-week program and then an additional 12-week program. That would only be for instance, a pregnant mother who has bonding time for 12 weeks and then has another circumstance happen. So the first 12 week is only bonding time with a child. So the ability to get beyond 12 weeks would only be for a pregnant mother that has some sort of crazy circumstance happen, cancer or an incident where additional weeks would be needed. I think something to keep in mind with this program is if those additional beyond 12 weeks happened, bear in mind the circumstances that would cause that to happen would happen anyway. If somebody's in an accident or required beyond the 12 weeks in the definition of the bill, they're most likely facing a life circumstance that is so dire that they're not working anyway. What this program is really meant to do is provide some ease to parents, provide ease to workers to say, Minnesota is a place that values you, Minnesota is a place that's going to support you, and we want you to stay in the workforce. We don't want you to leave. We want to provide this bridge that you might need in an extreme circumstance, and then we want you to get back into the workforce. So my goal, totally hear the concerns Natalie's bringing up. I hope that we can get to a place where this bill is better, and that's really what the role I'm playing in the Senate to try to get there.
I have a question.
Yes.
Did your mother have a bonding time when you were born?
That's a good question. I should ask her.
What's changed in the last couple generations? We're going to reinvent the whole state and the whole country? How did our grandparents and our parents, how did they get from day to day? Think about that.
We've
What's
done a.
changed?
Thank you, sir. It sounds like you probably don't like the program, which that's okay. I would just say we have. I respect that.
Could I answer his question?
One question, or one thing I want to say. We've done a lot of transformational things in America. We instituted Social Security. We created the Medicare and Medicaid program that provide and make sure that we don't have poverty among our seniors in this country. We have a public education system that makes sure that kids are cared for, whether or not their means are high, low, medium, it doesn't matter. So there's a lot of things that we have done in this country when we've needed to make change in order to provide for folks. And I think that's a really good value. I think we are.
Thanks. I think you both did a good job of kind of elucidating your points of view on that. So I'd like to shift. It's still in the healthcare realm. My name is Todd Redmond. I'm a Two Harbors resident. And there's a couple of bills. One is House File 49, and it's a companion bill in the Senate. I believe it's Senate File 96. And these bills are aimed at providing access to all for Minnesota Care. Currently, if you go on the healthcare exchanges, you cannot access Minnesota Care. Minnesota Care is available in every county in our state, 87 counties. There have been instances in the last 3 bienniums where certain counties were down to a single insurer on the healthcare exchange, which has led to high premium prices because of lack of competition. This would bring Minnesota Care in as an alternative on the exchange, so everyone would have that choice plus any private insurers that decide to get into that marketplace. I'm just wondering, I guess I'd like both of you to tell me whether you support this or not.
So thanks for the question. I'll be completely honest, I don't know everything about the bill, but I do support folks having an option to get onto MNsure to purchase a health insurance option. What I don't support is a full takeover. but I would definitely support some sort of public option that would compete beside what I have, like Blue Cross Blue Shield or Health Partners or whatever it might be. Because I think that creates competition. I think it helps lower costs. We know that Medicare and Medicaid right now have some of the best prices when negotiating with our health systems. I think that's a good thing. So how do we kind of continue to put pressure on insurance and drug prices by providing at least just an option for folks if they'd like it?
Thank you for the question. I think that the health insurance premiums for everybody, I've sat on health insurance in the county way back to Lake County days and St. Louis County days. It has been an issue to figure out how to keep our rates reasonable and give access to people, and they've done all kinds of things. Are we going to do the plan by age? Are we going to do the plan by single plus one, single plus family? There's been all these type of strategies to figure out how to get conglomerates as far as joining pools, separate entities so that you can share the risk and try to do that. But the goal has to be how to get access to people, how to have competition to keep those rates down. Because if there's not, then we figure out, we have other issues. When I looked at the #1 revenue thing, it was United Healthcare. I mean, their profits are unbelievable. So then my question comes down to, is that, how are we doing these premium things? Because their revenues are unbelievable of what it is. So it is a fair question to ask, and I think that, we're going to hear it. I haven't heard it on the House floor yet, and I don't think Grant has yet either in Senate. I'm on education, I'm on health finance, but it's mostly on talking about the nursing home, assisted living piece, and then I'm on workforce. So that piece hasn't come, but I appreciate the question. I'll be looking at it. I understand what your situation is, and I think it's a very valid point. We need to make sure we want to have choice in our doctors, we want to have choice in our providers, we want to make sure we have competition so we can keep that continuum solid. So, thank you. That right now, they are. But on the background studies, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings on what it is because we have processes for it, and what my perspective is we're not dealing with, we're making laws for law-abiding citizens because the criminals don't follow laws. So if we don't deal with the criminals and prosecute people and deal with it in a way that makes sense for society, we are accomplishing nothing by adding more laws to law-abiding citizens. The goal of what we want to mutually accomplish in society is not happening because they're not following laws. We have the highest amount of gun laws in Chicago where we don't have good outcomes. And so when you look at the states that have that, it's like the intent is there of what we all want safety. I want safety too. But the piece that's missing is what is showing? Are the outcomes having that? And that's not what we're seeing. The ones that have the highest amount of regulation are not having the best outcomes. So that is not the only piece of it. We have to deal with mental health. We have to deal with mental health. We have to deal with the root cause of what's happening in society. We got to make sure we support the family. We got to make sure we have jobs for people. We got to make sure people can read. If you can't read, you can't get a job. So we have mental health. If you have a disenfranchised person at 18, the biggest risk group is men, 18 years old. If they don't have a purpose and they can't get a job and you can't read, that's a definition of just going down a bad track. So we have to look at really what's happening. How are we going to get people to not have those precursors and those type of issues? Because this isn't going to accomplish it. The intent is there, and I hear what you're saying, but it isn't going to accomplish that, and we're seeing it from states that have. We have high crime in some of the most regulated high gun control areas in the U.S. right now.
Thanks for the question as well. I've made public statements about this a number of times. I'm doing my due diligence and looking into these gun bills because I think that's my job as a legislator. I'm not going to say I'm unequivocally for this or unequivocally against that because similarly to paid family leave, I want to make sure if we do something that we do it so that it works. I will say on the background checks, we have background checks in Minnesota. We have background checks. We do it if you go into Fleet Farm in Hermantown and you go and want to buy AR-15, you're going to get a background check. From my understanding, what this bill is trying to do is make it so that the loopholes that exist in our gun purchasing system are checked. So if you go onto armslist.com and try to buy an AR-15, you're gonna get flagged for a background check through this bill, right? And that's actually good for our local department stores, because that makes it so that they're on equal footing with some of these online retailers that are selling guns. Now, what I will say is I come from a hunting family. I am a gun owner myself. Some of the most cherished memories I have are shooting a shotgun with my stepdad and my grandfather. And so I strongly value our Second Amendment rights. And I don't know where I'm going to land on the background checks. I don't know where I'm going to land on the red flag laws. What I'll tell you is I had a conversation with a sheriff, not the one from here, but a different sheriff, who told me where he also didn't know where he was at on the red flag laws, but he told me a circumstance that happened to him. He told me that there was a gentleman in their town that everyone knew was a risk. And the family, his own family, came to the sheriff and said, we want your help to get guns away from our family member who is of danger to us and to others. And the sheriff said, unfortunately, that's not something that I can do, given current law. So the family later on contacted him when this family member was in detox and said, Sheriff, we're going to go get the guns as family members. And the sheriff said, well, I really appreciate you letting me know that, but you will be charged with burglary if you do that, if he files charges. He did. He filed charges, and the family was charged with burglary. So what I'm trying to figure out is, how do we protect Second Amendment rights? How do we protect our current lawful gun sellers? How do we protect hunters that want to go hunt with their family and pass down those traditions to their family members? But how do we make sure that our communities are safe? And I think if you talk to police, if you talk to the sheriff offices about these guns and you really dig in, you start to see where there's gaps. And so, again, I don't know where I'll land on these issues, and I'm probably going to disappoint half of you no matter what I do, but I hope you know that I'm at least digging in and I'm not just saying I'm for or against it. So that's what I'll say. Thanks.
Our next question will come back here, then we're going to go to this gentleman in the gray hat, and then we'll go to the center out of the auditorium.
I don't need your mic. No, you're second. We're going to hear first, and then we're going to do next. Oh, Louis.
Hello, my name is Tom Thompson. I live in Brimson area in the Alt Township, and I think I've met both of you before somewhere. And thank you for doing this. This is great for democracy. I am here for a little bit different reason, though. I'm here to introduce someone that is, her name is Jean Skinnerway Lawrence, and she is the chair of the Sandy Lake Band of Chippewa. And she's also secretary-treasurer of the 1855 Treaty Authority, which you have the northwest corner of the Senate district is in there. And she would like to speak to you, and I know I am chairman of the Minnesota Sierra Club, and we share a lot of common interests, so I am happy and proud to introduce Jean Skinnerway Lawrence.
Jean Skinnerway and Zeliznakar, Zawasasi and Dudain, Gamadawang, Mavinu, Jabba. Again, Jean Skinnerway is my name. I'm a Bullhead clan from Sandy Lake. I am the secretary, as Tom said, I am the secretary-treasurer for the 1855 Treaty Authority, which is pretty much the central area of Minnesota. We do go all the way up to the Canadian border, which is the northwest part of the senator's area there. But I did have a little prepared statement here. The Anishinaabe across the Great Lakes region, to include your district, regards Sandy Lake and Rice Lake area as the heart of the wild rice basket. Our Monoman, as you know, is sacred to us and is a critical part of our culture and our survival as Anishinaabe. I'm here to ask for your support on a couple of provisions that would protect our water. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency Board, the reinstatement, from what I understand, that was dissolved back in 2015. I don't know if you knew anything about that. Then the cumulative impact bill, we asked for an affirmative vote on that, which empowers communities and environmental justice. We join communities in your district who support the Prove It First bill that would provide common sense protections to our communities facing copper nickel sulfide mines. My home is in the 1855 treated territory that is under threat from a nickel mining proposal backed by mining giant Rio Tinto. Rio Tinto has the worst track record with indigenous communities worldwide. In closing, health-wise for healthy community, culture, relations, tribal state, ask for these provisions. Miigwech. But yeah, for Sandy Lake, we do have the Tamarack mine that is supposedly up and coming, so that's why we ask for those provisions.
Grant and I both participated in Sovereignty Day, and 11 of the tribal leaders were at the State House, and the Senate came over, and so we spent some time all together. So I can tell you that we both will be listening, as these things come forward. There hasn't been conversation at our level, at the House side, on these topics, but I appreciate hearing from you. I understand the ricing and these pieces, and so we did, I think last week, that was a bipartisan thing, and so we passed that last week, so that was a good thing for Minnesota, so thank you for the question.
Thank you so much for the question, and you brought up a couple of points earlier. I'll have to look into some of those specific bills that you were talking about. I am on the Environment Committee, so I anticipate that some of those things might be coming before us. On mining, I have been very, very transparent with my position on mining. What I believe is that I'm not an expert on environmental policy. I'm not an expert on mining. And so I, as a policymaker, have to rely on the agencies that we have given the authority to evaluate these projects, the ability to do that work. And so my goal, from whether it's Tamarack or any of the others, is to make sure that our agencies can do their due diligence and tell me as a policymaker whether or not certain regulations can be followed, whether what their mine plan is can stand up to our environmental standards. I'm also working with the NRRI, which is a U of M research facility in our district, to evaluate and come up with research that they're already doing on sulfide mining and clean water for the wild rice standard. I know that the wild rice standard, in order to protect our native lands and protect native wild rice, are higher than our drinking water standards. And so I really want to make sure that if these mines go through, that we can meet those standards and that they're followed. And so I'm working both from a regulatory standpoint, trusting our regulators to tell me that's the case, and then working with our researchers and the great U of M experts that do this stuff to tell me how we can do it even better. And so I'm providing some historic research, well, I'm hoping to provide some historic research to NRI and trusting in our agencies to tell me what they're seeing in these evaluations. With regard to the 1855 treaty, I've met with Chair Chavers as well as DeCamp up in Grand Portage, and I just presented a bill to get those treaty, as part of the treaty, let me back up. As part of the treaty, a payment was agreed to by the state for us using that land. That payment has not kept up since the 1970s. And so the existing payment is the exact same it's been. If you can imagine the latest inflation we've had, let alone over the last 50 years, that payment is far, far behind what we need to be providing for those treaty rights. And so I introduced a bill that would provide up to $15 million more to our indigenous tribes in Grand Portage and Bois Forte to get back on parity with what we agreed to all those years ago.
Trivial compared to what you had raised.
but here I am. I'm a member of the planning commission here in the city of Two Harbors. I could talk to your ears bleed, but I'll concentrate on one concrete, straightforward state of Minnesota issue. Highway 61 passes through our town, it's our main thing. Nothing happens up here unless it happens on Highway 61. There is a construction project scheduled for this forthcoming season. The estimated cost on it was around 17 millions, and then we were told that, well, money is tight, we can come up with about 6 millions, and so you as a planning commission have to decide which part of town we will inconvenience and partially remedy. With a budget estimate in excess of, I believe the number you said was 20 billions with a B, and our estimated project cost was around 17 million. That's what, a thousandth, less than a thousandth of what that surplus is. Why are we limited to only 6 millions? This is something that affects not only the town and the county, but every person who drives through here. There's no other way they can get through from one part of the state to the other without going through here if they want to go up the shore. And if we can get it fixed, simplifies things, but we're stuck. What can we do with a budget that is so big and you're talking about, well, let's not use it for the good of the state, let's give it back to the people. We've already taken it from them, now we're going to give it back to them. I'm saying you've already got it, let's spend it where it needs to be spent. I agree, education is a strategic good for the city, the state, and the country. Education should get it. Healthcare is another strategic good for all of us. Transportation is another limb on that tree. Why can't we get more than just the miserable 6 mil when we could easily spend 17 and do the job right and get it done and be done with it?
Thanks for the question, and I know that Natalie and I are well aware of this issue. In fact, we've met with the city on this issue. I've met with the Department of Transportation. I think Natalie has as well. So we've been talking about this. We've been putting pressure on the department to say, look, if this was your initial evaluation of the costs and now it's gone to here, we have a unique circumstance along this highway because we are the tourism thoroughfare for the entire state. So this is not just a local rural area, not that those don't matter, they certainly do, but in particular, if we have to shut down this highway for multiple summers or go and extend this project, that is a huge detriment, not just to our businesses, but to the entire region. And so it's something that I think both of us are very focused on. I have introduced a bill that would specifically appropriate that money through the Transportation Committee. I will say, and I'm not trying to hedge like a politician, I'm just telling you the truth. It is very hard in the state of Minnesota to get direct appropriations for projects.
Do you not already have the money? The 20 billion in the surplus?
We absolutely do. I'm just telling you, individual legislators writing bills for road projects almost never happens. What they do, what I'm hoping to do, and I will introduce the individual one, I'm hoping to get that. But the other thing we need to do is increase the overall Department of Transportation funding and then get the department to prioritize this, which is something Natalie and I have been pushing for, so that when they get that additional funding, that they prioritize this project given the unique circumstances of it being a thoroughfare in our region. And so I'm hopeful whether we get direct appropriation or the Department of Transportation to prioritize it with additional overall funding, that we find a way to get this done. The last thing I'll say, kind of similarly to direct appropriation, this is something that we can't just put in the bonding bill, for example. We can't put transportation projects into the bonding bill to directly fund a road. And so this is, it's kind of, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place and just trying to get that money through the Transportation Committee and talk to the Department of Transportation to make sure that this is their priority. And that's my goal. And we are working really diligently on that.
That's why borrow the money to bonding when the money is already in the state.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I will tell you, what the mood is among the people in town here, a bunch of them are ready to put up a toll gate on Highway 61 right now and stop every vehicle comes to put the hand out.
Right.
These are hot.
Yep. No, I hear you. Let me just clarify. When I was talking about a direct appropriation, I was not talking bonding. That would be cash money in the bill that I wrote. So I'm not advocating for bonding necessarily. I'm just saying that in the bonding bill, I couldn't have done that, was just my point. Does that make sense?
No.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of different funding streams. It's kind of confusing, but here you go.
I think, that's the frustration for Minnesota citizens. You look at this Highway 61 funding, and to me, it's logical. There is not one person from Minneapolis-St. Paul that doesn't go up that North Shore. So, it is not just a Two Harbors issue. It is a statewide, it is a USA issue. It's a thoroughfare, and it's also going to disrupt business and the whole community. So we have to get this job done, and it to me makes zero sense. We got $20 billion sitting there, but right now it's like every one of the dollars is going to be used in funding X, Y, Z, and triple Y. But we have a gap of whatever the number is, 6 million, 8 million, that should be able to, in a pretty simplistic way, be figured out when you have a $20 billion surplus. That's my feeling. It shouldn't be this complicated. With people to get the job done for the citizens of Minnesota. I mean, Highway 61 needs to get done. We have camping, there isn't a season that isn't used to go up the North Shore. And on top of that, it disrupts the entire community of Two Harbors and surrounding neighborhoods. For a year, 2 years, 3 years, and the cost of the project just increased to try to bid this out and get it done the right way, and have pedestrian, and then you have bike trails. So we are spending money in a lot of things, but it should be for things like this that can get done. When there's a gap like that, we should be able to close the deal. So to Grant's point, we are meeting with DNR and our Department of Transportation and working with people to say, look, what do we have to do to get this through?
Well, that's what I'm asking you.
I've been asking the same thing, so I hear you loud and clear.
We've been having regular meetings with them. I can't promise you enough. We are doing everything we can. I really believe that.
So we're going to go,
Well, I guess I'd like to say I'm not going to vote for or against anybody ever on the family leave thing, because I think I kind of favor the fact that you got to be really careful with that. Anyway, what fellow over here asked, what's changed? Well, a lot of things have changed, and I'm surprised that we haven't noticed. Number one is in the 1970s, from the 1970s on, the percentage of households that have two incomes from both parents is just skyrocketed, okay? So kids aren't coming home to school for mom making cookies that much anymore, right? I grew up like that, but that's not the way it is anymore. Number two is our children don't hang around. Our aunts and uncles and siblings and their kids and our cousins and stuff, they don't live next door anymore. So when you have a baby, they're not around. So those are two things that have changed, and I think we've all noticed it, but we've gone a half a century with this change accelerating and accelerating, and I can see why people want family leave aid, but I don't know why it has to be borne by an employer. So I'm a little torn. I'm very torn by that part. Okay, so I don't have a question, but I wanted to answer his question. There's two reasons why this has become a big issue. All right, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
be back to you in just a second, sir.
Hello, my name is Mark Bryan, and I am a school board member, and I've been involved in a lot of things, in a lot of ways over my life, and I'm also a business consultant, as well as a turnaround assistant type of person, but I have a reputation of not being very good at details, so I tend to fly at a fairly high height when I look at problems. And I, contrary to my friend Bill, I think this HF2 is probably one of the best things I've seen from a high viewpoint come along in all of the healthcare and other issues regarding family problems that I've seen. And I say that because I see it, and I'm throwing a question to you. I see it as not any kind of a financial issue at all in the kind of work that I do. As far as running my own business, sitting on boards and consulting. The cost of this program, when you look into the actual percentages and the possible combinations, is very small. And in fact, if you've got programs today that meet the basic requirements of this, you are not going to be hit with any kind of a charge. If you have a mix and match, you're going to get hit with a portion of it. So what this does essentially is it extends family leave and medical benefits to a huge group of people who have not ever had them before. And for anybody to stand up and say, because you work less than 30 hours a week, or you make less than $16 or $17 an hour, you're not entitled to take care of your family and your own medical circumstances, to me is inexcusable for the cost that's involved. If you look at a person making $68,000 a year and you apply the 0.7% fee to an employer that doesn't have this coverage, it amounts to, when you share it with the employee 50-50, about $19.88 a month, something like that, for a $68,000 a year job. Most of these people that are going to get coverage aren't making anywhere near that kind of money. So if they're making $34,000 a year, it's going to cost somewhere around $8 or $9 a month. That is not going to break anybody who's running a good, solid business. And I speak from experience. And I would say every company I've ever worked for or served can afford something like this without a major problem. So I'm just throwing my opinion out to you and asking you to look at it that way. And I also like to say, for the benefit of folks in the room, that the Minnesota House Research has put together a summary of HF2, dated February 9th, 2023, and it's the fourth engrossment, and it summarizes all this stuff. And in this summary, as I read it, not only are there protections for the employees, not only are there protections for the employers, but they're also very specific about what kind of support and assistance that this bill is going to provide people who are smaller employers. And for example, it's mentioned those under 50. Those under 50 are eligible to apply for subsidies from the state to help them implement this program and manage it with their employees. They're not out there on their own. So if you want to know what is involved in this, this is a real easy read, and it's summarized, a huge long bill, summarized pretty well, and I would recommend you all look it up on the internet. HF2, and it's by the Minnesota House Research.
Thank you.
Okay, we're ready? All right. Hear me good? Okay. My name's John Ducat. I'm a Two Harbors resident. The Axios news outlet this past week put out a ranking on GDP per county in the state of Minnesota. We have the dubious distinction in Lake County to be the worst in the state. Between the years of 2010 and 2020, our GDP in this county shrank by 4.3% average per year for 10 years straight. Cook County was right behind us. They average a loss of 3.4% per year for 10 years. Right now, basically, for Lake County, we lost 43% of our gross domestic product. How can we turn around and have all these wonderful policies and programs that we're going to have here when we're continuously shrinking here? We're not seeing any new businesses coming to the forefront to these our two counties. And I just don't see how the state of Minnesota is actually caring about northeastern Minnesota. I just don't see it. In 10 years, we've been cut in half. We've lost over, I think it was 300 people from the city of Two Harbors, the county seat of Lake County, since the last census. What programs, what policies, what things are happening at the state level that could encourage more businesses to come here so that our children can stay here, our grandchildren can stay here, and that we don't have to basically leave the state or leave the area. It's slowly deteriorating. I've been here 30 years, and it's tough to see. Any questions? Any answers?
No, thank you for your comments, and I think that's a very real thing that a lot of us are facing in this region. And I think what you're seeing on top of that is that retirees are picking our region to live and retire. And that's great in some circumstances, but what our employers are facing when they want to possibly consider northern Minnesota is our housing stock is not keeping up. We have less families living in our homes and more retirees. That's okay. But when you talk about an employer considering, well, should I be just outside the Twin Cities? Should I be in, somewhere in Wisconsin outside of Milwaukee, or should I be in northern Minnesota? And they start talking about housing, that becomes a very real challenge. And so I'm really hoping on the housing front and on the child care front that we can introduce some support from the state that will help develop more housing in our region, that we can provide child care tax credits. A bill that I'm authoring would provide up to $12,000 a year. Depending on your income, it would go down for those that need that child care option. Because we know that when folks are determining where they're going to settle, where employers are looking, they need to know that there's going to be housing and that there's going to be child care. Otherwise, they're not going to get the millennial and under youth workforce that they need in order to operate. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm working on a solar manufacturing incentive for our region. The problem is, talking to the manufacturers, they are not sure if they can expand beyond where they're at. Because again, back to the points that I just brought up. And so I'm working on how do we provide incentives, how do we support housing, how do we enforce childcare, how do we get local government aid and that PILT formula for our public lands in Lake County to give our local communities more money they need. So we're looking at this holistically, but at the end of the day, if we don't have the housing and more folks are retiring here, our GDP is going to continue to decrease. So just know that I'm looking at it sort of broadly and trying to look at opportunities that we might have. The last thing I'll say, there was a unique bill that we heard before the tax committee on an angel fund. Basically a big, large fund that would be created at the state level to incentivize entrepreneurs to start businesses. I think sometimes, historically, what you've seen in northern Minnesota and through the IRRB, which is a great agency and I am proud of what they do for our region, what they look at are very large employers that might have the opportunity to come here. And that's really important, and I want to continue to support that. What we fail, I think, sometimes to look at are opportunities to support our small businesses and our entrepreneurs that could start a mom and pop shop and then grow from there. I think of the DigiKeys of the world in central Minnesota, very rural area. Marvin Windows, for example, started as family companies and grew from there. And so I'm looking at how do I use my seat on the IRRB to incentivize that agency to provide for some of those small and medium-sized businesses, not just the big white whales. So I hope that, that shows you that we're working on this from a holistic approach, but it's difficult.
Thank you to the question. My perspective on your point of we need to grow jobs. I mean, we absolutely have to be a business-friendly state. If we have North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, and Iowa allowing for businesses to come in, they're looking at what is that community going to do. When they all have snow, and they're willing to come to the snow belt, but they're not willing to come if they have the highest taxes. Employees are looking at that as well as employers, and we are leading the way in the tax scale. And so it's not just affecting people that you think are wealthy, it's middle income, people starting families, everybody's looking at this. We had another year where people left the state. Over 20,000 left the state. It's not just seniors going to Florida. It's 28-year-olds, it's 45-year-olds. It's people leaving for a life that matches what they're looking for. So when you look at those pieces, if we don't have people that are job creators to come in, how many of you have started a business in this room? Good. So you know what I'm saying. You've probably taken out a credit line. You probably went to the bank and done a pro forma. I've done that too. And then you do a personal guarantee. And most of these businesses that I've talked to and that I've been around, they're lucky if they had a return that matched even the stock market. And that doesn't account for working 80-hour weeks because you also have skin in the game. You're the one creating this thing. So we have to encourage people to want to do that. It is not a 40-hour week when you start a business. Probably none of you in the room that started a business worked a 40-hour week. You worked hard to get where you're going, and that's the fruits of your labor. And we have to encourage people to come. Two Harbors is a beautiful community. We have to give people reasons to come here, and they will. But it has to be competitive. It doesn't matter if we think it's fair in Two Harbors. If it's not matching up with the Midwest, it's going to be a problem. And we're not going to be able to wine and dine people to say, choose Two Harbors, choose Proctor, choose Hermantown, because it's going to come down to, are we competitive? And right now, Minnesota is not competitive. We are not competitive in the sense of bringing in people to start jobs. And so as that number starts to go down, the issue becomes all of us in the room have to spread the tax base on fewer people. And when you have a thriving business community in your town, you have less property taxes, you have a base. And without that anchor of business, and then we have to have housing. I have people calling me all the time, look, I want to move up there, I can't find a house. We can't just be doing all the, $50 million for the homeless project here and there, and all those things are great, but if you can't get a house, lower middle income and middle income, that's what people are struggling with in Two Harbors, in Proctor, and nobody can find that house. And you have to have that, apartments, duplexes, housing, so that people can build in a community. And we're not spending as much energy as I wish we were on that. We're talking about a lot of other programs that we're going to fund, but you can't have jobs without houses and places for people to live. So that's what I would.
And I live up Split Rock River. I'm a retired carpenter. I moved up here. I built a retirement home. And I first want to thank both of you for running for office and being here. Appreciate that. I was told about this, so I came, and my complaint, you could call it, was property taxes. And I found out last year, and I went to the Silver Creek Township meeting there, and I found out how lucky I was, and my taxes went from $150,000. My house price was $159,000 to $309,000. I thought, oh, aren't I lucky? And of course, then there was a guy who had a house that was over 100 years old. That's not very well insulated or anything else, and his property went up just twice as much, And of course, we're fortunate because everybody wants to move here. And I see houses being built that are $1 million homes now being built. Like I said, I'm a retired carpenter. I mean, I see these beautiful homes. I've seen concrete trucks constantly going up Highway 61 all winter long. That means they're pouring concrete someplace. My grandparents had the cabin across the street. And I remember when you could stand in the middle of Highway 61 and play baseball in the winter time. There was a group going in from Silver Bay and coming up, and that's all the traffic there was. Now it's houses going from there's houses every place. But my taxes went up, and I went to the board to find out what's going on, and they said, well, we're required to get whatever your cost of your house is up to this. Because I'm so lucky, everybody's been buying houses around here, it's forced up the value of my house. The next thing is that the homestead, you don't get that anymore because that only goes up to $74,000 or something like that, which, gee whiz, average house now is $400,000. And again, I feel so fortunate. I have this nice house that I built and everything. Now my taxes went up by about $800. And they're probably going to go up some more because I'm so fortunate. I live in an area where wealthy people come in and buy up property and things and whatever and have all this stuff. And I live right across from the lake. Thank God I'm not on the lake because that's even crazier. So, I mean, and I actually called your office and I called your predecessor, Tom Bach, before about this. And, I mean, I think you have to look at this and say, hey, there's something wrong here that these taxes have gone up this much. I mean, I'm retired. I didn't get a gigantic increase in any of my pensions or anything else. So, I mean, you get to the point where you tax people out of houses too. So,
Thank you for the question, and honestly, I get a lot of emails on that, on the very fact that the home valuations have went insanely high. Whether you're first-time home buyers, or you've been there for 10 years, 20 years, everybody's property value just miraculously went up. Apparently, it's worth more. You're taxed more now, too. So it's gotten to the point where people can't afford the property taxes at multiple levels. And so I know that a plan has been put forth by the GOPs to look at the property tax levels and to do property tax refunds. That's an initiative on there, along with reducing some of the tax brackets, trying to encourage businesses to come into the communities and to address that, because that is a big concern for a lot of people at every age bracket. It's just the high valuation of houses that went on, where people were in bidding wars, all cash offers, for a house that would have been $100,000, $150,000 less, and it's went on in every community. So that is not sustainable, and those rates that just keep going up on a new lease. So there is a lot of discussion on that, and I think hopefully we'll get something through this session.
Well, I feel for you because I'm a first-time home buyer in 2019 in Hermantown, and I can tell you, if I had known what the property tax valuations would be, I may not have bought my home. So it's definitely difficult. There's several things that I want to try to do, and I faced this as a city councilor as well, where the county was assessing at certain rates and we were pulling them back and exempting certain folks. Number one, I talked about the LGA and CPA. That's going to be an enormous break for property owners because it's going to provide our counties and our local governments the money they need for the core services that we need to provide. The second is that PILT formula. I already talked about it, but that's a big saving for our region. And part of the reason you're not seeing houses built in our region is because we have so much public land. And so we have a real issue with the land availability, the wetlands, the rock. So housing construction, I grew up in Fargo. If you wanted a new housing development, you put up 500 homes, you buy a farm, boom. Here, you just can't do that. And so that's a real issue. The third thing is I am looking at the homestead tax credit. There's been a couple of different bills, Republican and Democrat introduced, that would increase that level that you talked about, the 75,000. Increase that substantially to get us back up on parity of where that's been. There's also a veterans homestead tax credit that I would like to increase. And then thirdly, there's a taconite relief area homestead tax credit that 2 harbors would qualify for that I would like to increase. Right now, the taconite homestead tax credit is funded by taconite taxes, and it's only $278 a year. So we need to bump that up, and the fund has some additional money so we could do that. So those are some of the ideas. In terms of the valuations, unless we wanted to put a cap on valuations, which that harms people as well because they don't want us to tell them you can't sell your home for a certain price. You know, that's a tough issue too. But we're looking at multiple options for trying to reduce the property tax burden. Looks like you had something else to say. Quick.
I built the house to retire. I didn't build it to speculate.
Yeah.
And that's,
I hear you.
A lot of people live in houses.
Yep.
They live in a long time.
Yep.
Yes.
I don't
absolutely.
like taxes.
Yep.
I believe in taxes.
Yep.
But if the increase that quickly,
Reasonable.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nope. I
Go ahead, sir.
My name is Craig Russo. I'm a business owner and building owner. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for helping get North Shore Mining with whatever the deal is with Saki Trust and everything.
Yeah.
That is. Quick on the highway thing, going to some of the meetings, it's a big project, and they were talking about it too, that it's going to be like a 25-year project. So I think the importance of for how business and flow to make sure that we're improving the traffic flow through. I just wanted to throw that out. My actual question is kind of related to property taxes. Minnesota's been known to have, if not the most complicated property taxes, but probably in the top thing. And as a building owner, we have an issue here in Lake County that a lot of residents aren't aware of, but it's fiscal disparity tax.
Oh, yeah.
And it's been a big issue, and we had a really big issue in 22. And Mr. Bach was going to try to help fix it because some of the fiscal disparity numbers were huge. But I've kind of worked on it for quite a while, trying to get, and it's kind of like a lot of county commissioners don't quite understand it. basically the county auditor department knows a little bit about it, but I think it's a tax that needs to be repealed. I think it's useless. There's 87 counties in the state of Minnesota, and this fiscal disparity taxes for Cook County, Lake County, Crow Wing County, Itasca County, can't remember what I'm missing there.
St. Louis.
Yeah, parts of St. Louis County. Duluth isn't included.
Right.
And then it all started back in 1971 down in the metropolitan area. So there's only 2 areas. They have, what, 6 or 7 counties, and we have 6 or 7 counties, and there are 87 counties. And there's a lot of confusion on it. It's been discussed a lot. And in my opinion, from the research that I've done on it, it needs to be done. I mean, you buy a building here, you should be taxed, fairly on your building here, and the taxes should stay first locally, city-wise, county-wise, and state-wise. So anything that you can do to possibly take a look at that fiscal disparity.
Yeah.
I know the other thing that gets dragged into it a little bit is when they talk about the taconite tax. So they start fighting about that. To me, they're 2 different taxes. Throw one more quick thing in there. On the IRRB money and all that there, I'm not 100% sure that 2 Harbors and Silver Bay and the other people, I don't know how much we're getting as far as our fair share with the tonnage. I think we've had more tonnage go out of here in 2 Harbors the last few years than we had back when I was in the taconite industry back in the 80s and stuff like that. So I want to make sure that for whoever in that IRRB money that we're getting our fair share here on the North Shore too. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So I don't think we need to go into the weeds on disparity aid, but it is a complicated formula, and Lake County's frankly getting the poor end of the stick on that one. And so I have a bill that would fix the disparity aid gap that occurred back in, I think it was 2019 or something. It's a long story, but we are trying to fix that. Now, with regards to the disparity aid in general, it's something that I want to dig in more on the tax committee, because I hear you. There's probably certain counties that feel like it's not working out for them, and I get it. And so that's something we can definitely look at. Now, lastly, with the IRRB, I think part of the reason, sadly, that 2 Harbors in particular doesn't get your fair share is because Natalie doesn't get a seat on that board. And so you get me, but because the taconite relief area doesn't reach down into other areas, you get less representation than, say, Itasca County, even though the mines are in our district. The operating mines are in our district and the district next to us, and yet Itasca is getting more money than 2 Harbors is. And so for me, that's a real equity issue. I've already talked to Ida Rukavina, the commissioner of the IRRB, about that, and I anticipate us getting more support in 2 Harbors in this region for that.
Thank you both for being here, and it's great to see so many people here engaged in democracy. My question was around public education. I am a product of the K-12 public school system here in this district, coming out of ISD 166 in Cook County. I currently have a niece and nephew who are currently enrolled in Cook County schools. So my question is about class sizes, and there was a bill heard, I believe, in the Education Finance Committee, both in the House and the Senate last week. I work for Education Minnesota, and in every corner of the state, one of the biggest challenges that educators are facing is that class sizes are just too large. They're growing disproportionately year by year, and it's neither good for student outcomes or for educators. And my question to you is, do you support the bill that's both in the House and the Senate? And I will read you the ratios just so I don't get it wrong. The ratios in the bill are for kindergarten through grade 3, a class size of 17:1, for grades 4 through 9, a class size of 21:1, and for grades 10 to 12, a class size of 23:1. So I'm wondering if you support this bill, why or why not? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Katie, for the question. I think this is my bill, so I hope it is. So this is something that I'm carrying. I care deeply about our class sizes. I care deeply about our education system. I will be 100% honest. And that is, I want to figure out a way to make sure that our contract negotiations for our teachers are as strong as they possibly can be, that we're making sure and reducing our classroom sizes. this particular provision in the bill is something that I support in my heart, and I want to figure out a way to get there. But I do know that right now the workforce shortages that we're facing, not just in education, but literally everywhere, are very difficult on our school districts. And so I don't know where I'm at specifically on that provision. I'm doing more research. I'm talking to superintendents, school administrators, teachers, admin, all of the different stakeholders, much like I do on all the issues, because I have to, because our seat is that important in all these negotiations. And I'm hoping we can find a place where we get teachers to a better place in their negotiations with classroom sizes, and also make it so that our school administrators feel like they can continue to operate their schools. So I don't have a great answer for you, but I'm the author on the bill, and I'm right in the heat of those negotiations, so I appreciate the question.
Great question. Thank you. My position is, I don't think mandates are the answer, and I'll tell you why. I've had a lot of people send me actual dissertations of what this would do, and I just got one this morning that said, look, if you put a mandate like this, what happens in education is kids enroll, say high school, what they want to take. The principal, superintendent, the leads on the committees, they'll look at them, how many people need Algebra 1? How many people need Algebra 2? What it is we need. If you mandate class size, that means that you're going to have, if you have a higher amount of people that want Algebra 2, and you're mandated with Algebra 1, you're going to drop down offerings to kids of what you're able to provide in the district. So for school choice for the kids, on what they need, every year changes, and I know that from even being in the nursing home world, the mandates, the unintended consequences of actually mandating it, if you have 20 kids that have X need, it's an honors class, or it's a this class, it's comparing apples to oranges, and the needs of the photography class, 1, 2, 3, the algebra 1, 2, 3, all the types of things are different, and it's the same thing in healthcare. When I'm dealing with dementia residents versus people who all need meds, but everybody that I took care of didn't have the same needs. So, and that changes. It changed by the day in the healthcare world. So to have mandates on mandated staffing, it leaves zero flexibility for the providers than to really serve the people you need to serve. So my position is it needs to have local control with the school board and the people that are there that know their community and their students. The consequences are intended or positive when you go down this path, but how it actually plays out is going to be less opportunity for superintendents, principals, and teachers to really look at what the curriculum needs are from year to year.
Can I add a clarifying statement? I just want to make sure it's clear. The bill that I have, and I'm not sure if it's the exact one that Katie's talking about, the bill that I have would allow classroom sizes to be negotiated.
Yes.
So we're not talking ratios or telling schools exactly what they have to have. It would just allow our teachers to negotiate that and have that as part of what they're talking about when they talk about the stresses on their job. So there is a little bit of nuance there, and it's something that we're looking into strongly.
There were suggested ratios with the follow-up of like let local districts negotiate themselves of what the appropriate ratio would be. Yep.
In the Senate.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Lovell, and I have rarely attended forums like this, and I appreciate you both being here. I have a lot of different topics. I talked to Natalie the other day, and she invited me here. A lot have been covered today, but one that sifted to the top of the list for me today that's concerning is I'm not affiliated with any pro-life group or anything like that, but recently Governor Walz signed into law that our state has no limit on abortion up till point of birth for any reason, as I understand it. And sadly, we join only 9 other countries that allow this, including China and North Korea. I hope I have this bill number right. It's SF90. If I have this right, that it would be removing any requirement of any healthcare workers to provide care for survivors of a botched abortion, when a little baby who manages to survive that trauma is denied any care and literally left to die, or as I've heard from former workers in those clinics that they've actually been killed. And I'm just wondering, I guess I'm asking you to vote against that, and what your views are on that.
Thank you for the question and for your passion behind the question. I'm not familiar with, I think it was Senate File 90.
I think so.
Okay. Is this the PRO Act?
Nope, it's the one.
Different one.
Different one.
Okay, I'll look at it. On the PRO Act though, on the bill that Governor Walz did sign, this is a bill that did not change any of Minnesota's laws. All it did was it took existing Minnesota law when it came to reproductive health and put it into statute. So basically the legislature just approved what was already on the law books based on judges' decisions. And so that was something that I ran on, certainly. Codifying Roe v. Wade was something that I was strongly in favor of. And I will say, in terms of late-term abortions, there was one of those in the last 2 years after 24 weeks. And when you think about the circumstances around a late-term abortion, in Minnesota, there are no doctors that allow voluntary abortion after 24 weeks. What they do have is circumstances where if the mother's life is in danger, if something is going wrong with the pregnancy, that they have that option. And so just consider that while the law has that, the ethics behind medical care ensure that it's only under those circumstances that the doctor feels like, again, certain things are the case where that has to be done. So in no way are we saying, okay, everybody line up, for abortions at 40 weeks or whatever it might be. That's not the way it would work in Minnesota in our health system.
Thank you for the question. House File 1 is written where it allows all the way to 40 weeks. I think the difference, when I was talking to people, pro-choice people wanted Roe versus Wade, and really what that was viability, which viability, that's heartbeat is 12 weeks, viability is, 24, whatever it is, 25. It keeps going down because the technology has changed since I had my child early and when on bed rest. So the question I think right now, and there's a House File 91 and a Senate matching file that addresses if an abortion is a botched abortion and that baby's born alive. It is written that we will not give medical care to that baby. And in the House File side, they have denied the amendments to say we want at least to have pain medication given to that baby because all the technology and science says babies can feel pain at birth. And that has not been accepted. So my feeling is if it doesn't happen very often, then we should for sure be able to at least give a baby medication to not feel pain in that end time. And then if they are born alive, that we do care that we would do for anybody else if they're born alive. So that's my position on House File, I believe it's 91.
I will just add to that. My wife performs anesthesia. She's an advanced practitioner in a hospital. She does this for a living. In no circumstance would an anesthesiologist or a CRNA have the ability to provide anesthesia to a baby in those circumstances. And that's why this law is written in a broad way that trusts doctors and medical providers to provide the care that they need. And so I think that's really, really important. It shouldn't be me or Natalie as non-physicians dictating how a woman gets their reproductive health. And I think that's really, really important to know.
Well said, this is democracy in action. Thank you. I'm Rod Saline from North Star Township, a little bit west of Two Harbors. I'm here to see if you can help us with broadband. We are a small township. We have 83 households, 200 residents in the township, and so we are rural and sparse. And so came just to see what is happening with some of the funds, I think, from the federal government. If you have any recommendations for a small little township in rural Minnesota.
Thanks, Rod, and thanks for being here. So there's a broadband bill that's authored in the Senate, I'm not sure on the House, by Judy Seeberger. And in that bill, it would provide, I believe it's about $300 million for those matching dollars for the feds to get more broadband. But one of the things that was missing in that bill was a rural disparity, I'm using that word because we talked about it earlier, but a rural disparity sort of funding increase, because we know how difficult it is to reach some of those more sparse areas and the hard rock that exists in the Northland. So as part of that bill, I asked the author, based on feedback from RAMS, which is the Iron Range Municipality and Schools Group, to increase the grant eligibility for our region to 75% of total costs rather than 50. So that's a substantial increase that'll help, I think, communities like yours and others in our region get that additional funding that they need in order to get there. I'm thinking we'll make this big investment. We have in the past, and there's federal dollars on the table, so I'm really, really hopeful. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I think the broadband topic is really essential. I mean, regardless of where we live, broadband is critical for education, for jobs, for just communication. So 100% for the townships and the small areas outstate Minnesota to have funding. And that's kind of like with the education. Regardless of where we live, it has to be equitable. It can't be just a Minneapolis-St. Paul 7-suburb area and then outstate is left for whatever's left. We have to have some thoughtful discussion to make sure that we get our fair share of the pie up here in northern Minnesota. I can stay a couple minutes. I know, Grant, you have young children. I can answer some more if people have it. I'm here.
Well, we certainly so appreciate your time. Let's
Sir,
get both of our legislators.
Just give her one more chance here.
I'd like to address more than one issue real quickly. When I was on the Normanna Township Board, south of you, the evaluation of our property was compared to a 40-acre farm with outbuildings. We have a house and a garage, a chicken coop. That's it. Our taxes were jacked up in comparison to that home over on the Lismore Road. We don't even compare in size of land, 20 acres versus 40. We don't compare in buildings. And I got a 43-year-old house that isn't finished yet. Theirs was. Total tiled bathrooms up and down, fireplaces, you name it. But my taxes went up because I was evaluated against something that wasn't comparable. I got a business in 2007. It's a storage business, and it has partial wetlands on it. Actually, it's been built on a wetland. 2007, the taxes, we bought it in the latter half of the year, were they were $13,000. Red Pen plan came along, that's a school makeover, 339% increase. My property was evaluated on another piece of property, falsely evaluated on that property, and so my taxes went up to $21,000 in 1 year. Not only was the school district at fault, but they kept evaluating it in St. Louis County without taking into consideration that 3 acres of that is still wetlands. I cannot use it, I can't build on it. There's some inequity here, big time. But we don't have a voice to do anything about it unless we go all the way downstate. We have to go through the township and then the county and then all the way down the state. That takes time away from me because I already have an elected position as a soil and water. I visited both of you downstate 2 weeks ago. I've been doing that for 20 years. So as a homemaker, a business owner, I'm an elected official, how much time do I have to spend trying to get a new 18.7% increase in my taxes on my business?
I think to your point, there's a lot of discussion about how we get taxes, whether it's business tax property evaluated or personal residential property. evaluated. And so I hear what you're saying. I think Senator Hauschild hears what you're saying. There's a lot of discussion going on in tax committees on the House side and the Republican side. And I think we're going to see some changes, is my hope and prayer, on property taxes, on how it affects, because the goal is to create a business-friendly climate, and two, to have reasonable property taxes. And we all know the assessed values that went through the roof on the business side and on the residential property side. So we're looking at formulas on how you get equity and how you deal with buildable land, not buildable land. Comps were not considered fair by people. So that is a statewide theme. And so I think that we're going to be hearing it at tax committee. We haven't been voting on anything yet, but it's going to come to the